Love this question that was posed by Jen. She says, can you talk about KVO lines?
So this creator did a fantastic job going over all the considerations for KVO. KVO, if you don't know, is keep vein open. It's a continuous slow rate of infusion of saline to try to keep that vein from clotting off or collapsing or what have you, whatever theoretical rationale we have for that infusion. And it's slow enough not to overhydrate the patient so we don't cause fluid overload. We're going to do a little deep dive into this whole system and mechanism of KVO and go over some theory, no data, only physics, and what we know about anatomy and physiology. So let's start with why this even exists. We have a thing called KVO because we're finding that our PIVs are either infiltrating or they are clotting off. I think that's the biggest problem. They are thrombosing at the tip of the catheter and it becomes unusable. So the theory is if the clots are developing at the tip of the catheter, then maybe if we push it away with saline, it's going to push away all the clotting factors. Maybe? Here are some things to consider, and I really hope that people doing the research will actually consider these variables and not just ignore them to determine whether it's a good idea or not. I actually don't know if its KVOs are actually effective or if it's not effective or counterproductive, but let's go over all the science that we can and determine from there or know how to research or what to research. First of all, saline is not normal fluid. It is a foreign object to the body. Now, our body takes it and redistributes it to a normal concentration due to hemoconcentration. However, it is not normal for saline to be in our body at that concentration at all times. Actually, ever. That's why we have whole blood running through our system. So the question would be, what are we disrupting with normal saline? I've seen lines with just saline, slow saline push or slow saline infusions for 2 or 3 days and they clot off completely. Why is that? It's just saline. It should have worked, but for some reason, it disrupted the homeostasis of the endothelium. Now, of course, there's other considerations of why it clotted at the tip of the catheter. It could be an abrasive insertion, meaning if you did not insert the needle and catheter all the way, making sure it didn't touch the walls of the veins, but in fact you inserted, got a little bit of flashback, got some of that needle in, and then you went ahead and advanced that catheter, that is going to scratch a little bit of that glycocalyx protein off the veins. Now, how much can the patient's vein tolerate? We don't know. However, it does cause an abrasive action. Try taking that catheter and scratching it on your skin. See how smooth and soft that feels. Not at all. Actually, it'll leave a scratch mark, meaning it's scratching the hard, dead skin cells of the surface of your skin. So if it's scratching that off, what is it doing to the inside of your veins? But I digress. We're talking about KVO. Now, depends on your pumps whether you're going to have a thrombosis issue or not. Did you know that some of your pumps, I believe the Alaris, don't quote me on this, but some of the pumps who have a sequence mechanism, they have to open that chamber up, which opens up for that positive pressure to suck up just a little bit before the next sequence pushing that fluid out. There is a moment of dead space. That dead space of pressure is going to be overcome by the positive pressure of your veins, which is going to suck that blood back into the catheter just a little bit for a moment before the next push. How many small touches of blood protein and clotting factors is it going to take, metaphorically, how many licks is it going to take before you get to the center of that Tootsie Pop, before you start to clot off at the tip of that catheter? I don't know, but I'm sure that it's adding up over time. And of course, a special thank you to the Avatar group. As Ivy Key has mentioned, our friends in Australia did these fantastic fluid dynamic studies. They found that sometimes even the sheer force of your flush could erode that glycocalyx protein. Imagine power washing. If power washing through just pressure alone can erode cement, what can power washing our veins do with just saline? Now, does this mean we don't flush? No, of course we need to flush. However, how hard you flush is going to make a difference. The problem is we have no idea how hard we're flushing. What PSI are you pushing that plunger? What is appropriate PSI? So this is something to consider. Maybe it's not the body that's the problem. Although, yes, there are clotting factors that do happen. Our body does not like more holes than it already has. So it's going to try to close it up. However, maybe it's what we're doing during the care and maintenance. Our interventions and the techniques that we have been taught traditionally might be the low-hanging fruit or the critical factor, not whether the patient gets KVO infusion or not. Case in point, a research study of fluid dynamics, I believe by the Avatar group, double check me on that. They found that the angle of attack of your insertion for the PIV was an inversely exponential correlation to your dwell time. Meaning, the higher your attack angle for insertion, the less likely or the more likely that IV was going to fail sooner, the less time that catheter was going to work. Now, if you're still here, then let's talk about something really interesting, which is catheter to vein ratio. Why does that matter? Who cares? Bigger's better. Size matters, yes, but smaller is better for long-term dwell. We are going to table rapid infusion, rapid transfusion. We're going to table trauma out of this conversation because this is more about making these catheters last. So let's talk about catheter to vein ratio. Why I don't like bigger is better, why I like smaller is better. Because if we are hypothesizing that the saline infusion is going to push away that clotting factor and that clotting from developing, how much better is whole blood able to push that away rather than an abnormal chemical called normal saline? Wouldn't you want your body's natural blood or natural river to flush away all those clotting factors? Well, you can do that if you have a small enough catheter, and you can't do that if your catheter is too big and is choking up on that vein. There is no hemodilution. There is no blood diluting those clotting factors at the tip of that catheter because we choked it up with a larger than necessary catheter. Here's another one that's really fascinating that I've been thinking about for a long time. The length of the catheter also affects the flow rate, also affects the hemodilution. So longer than unnecessary also adds to that hemo slowdown. What's the scientific word for that? Poiseuille's law also includes length in the equation, so it does matter, especially when you're counting for resistance. And resistance, of course, slows down speed, which slows down the rate of dilution of those clotting factors. Now, for those of you following me, you know I tout the vein purchase is key. I still lean towards getting more vein purchase if possible than less, because I think infiltrating that IV is way worse than a potential thrombi. Now, if you really stuck around, let me show you a little trick and secret that I use to get some of my information. Oh, I don't want to show you this, but I'm going to do it because I care about you guys. How does catheter to vein ratio affect thrombosis in the veins?
Catheter to vein ratio is an essential consideration in vascular access to minimize the risk of thrombosis. When the diameter of the catheter is too large in proportion to the vein, it can impede blood flow and lead to endothelial damage, increasing the risk of thrombosis. Additionally, a larger catheter can cause turbulence in blood flow, which can further contribute to clot formation. On the other hand, a catheter that is too small may not provide adequate flow rates, potentially leading to stasis and clot formation. Therefore, maintaining an appropriate catheter to vein ratio is crucial in reducing the risk of thrombosis in the veins. For a more in-depth understanding of the impact of catheter to vein ratio on thrombosis, I can provide references to relevant studies and clinical guidelines.
Ooh, yes, please. Turn on. Can you give me references in the INS guidelines about catheter to vein ratio?